Hello and welcome. The world must tell Israel enough is enough, says the Turkish Prime Minister. But will the international community hold the Israelis accountable for their attack on the 8th flotilla to Gaza?
Israel should understand the seriousness of such mistakes and not repeat them. Yesterday's event was a black point in history. This was an inhuman attack. Even pirates have rules that they follow. Israel violated international law.
Well, Israel's facing fierce international criticism for the violent raid. Israeli naval commandos stormed the convoy of 6 vessels carrying humanitarian aid to prevent them from breaking the blockade Israel has imposed on Gaza since 2007. In the confrontation that followed, at least 9 activists were killed on the lead vessel, the Mavi Marmara. Israel says its commandos were defending themselves after being attacked by activists on board. But flotilla organizers say the soldiers used excessive force and fired without provocation. The United Nations has condemned the act and called for an impartial investigation. The European Union, Russia and China have also joined the international chorus for an independent inquiry and an end to the blockade in Gaza. On today's show, we will ask, will Israel have to answer for using lethal force on the 8th flotilla? Or is accountability in question, as it was after the Gaza war? Join us with your questions and comments. Send an SMS or an email, or just call directly into the show. We're going to be joined from Jerusalem by Mitchell Barak, a former aide to Benjamin Netanyahu and speechwriter for Ariel Sharon when he was Israeli Prime Minister. Mitchell now heads Kivun, a research and political communications firm based in Israel. With me here in the studio is Arab-American writer and organizer Ramzi Kaisia. He was on the International Board of Directors for the Free Gaza Movement from 2008 to 2009 and currently serves as an officer for the affiliate of the organization in Washington, D.C. But before we get to our guest, we spoke on the phone with the former U.S. Ambassador Edward Peck, who was among activists in the flotilla when it was attacked by Israeli commandos. He returned to the U.S. just a few hours ago, and here's some of what he had to say about the raid.
The sort of thing people talked about, if they try to move you, just go limp so it's harder for them to do. Don't aggravate them. Don't make them angry. Link arms, it's sort of the we shall overcome kind of approach of nonviolent resistance. Apparently on the big ship, where there were 600 people, some violence did take place. As to who started it, of course, it's important to bear in mind that since every camera and cell phone was confiscated by the occupying troops, Israel, for the first 36 hours, had total control of the news. And so it comes out that, we're all terrorists and all supporters of Hamas, whereas this was not anything directed against Israel. It was humanitarian. It wasn't religious or political. Israel chose to see it as being hostile.
To that extent, Ambassador, do you feel that it is going to achieve enough of a highlight on what's happening in Gaza and what happened here to actually create some kind of change?
Well, yes, sir. That's the hope. A few of the Israelis that I spoke to in the processing procedure that they went through said that this could be a turning point, which is, of course, what we all wanted. Many of us were hopeful that seizing the opportunity, Israelis would say, yes, let's let that material in. We can control, but it's all medicines, building materials, prefabricated houses, electric-powered wheelchairs, this kind of thing. Let that go in there to the people and let us benefit from it. But that was not the approach taken. And the end result is, of course, that we have a much more difficult situation now than we had before.
Well, that was a former U.S. ambassador and activist, Edward Peck, talking to us a short while ago from Maryland here in the USA, having returned from being on that flotilla heading to Gaza. Well, let's get to some questions. We have Mitchell Barak in Jerusalem, and we have Ramzi Kaisia here in the studio. Ramzi, if I could start with you and ask, could this be a turning point? A lot of people think this is going to be something that will force Israel's hand into a stronger stance towards peace. It can't carry on like this.
Yeah, for the first time, we're seeing governments getting directly involved in not only condemning the Gaza blockade, but pledging to challenge it. And I think this could spell the beginning of the end and the collapse of this siege after almost 4 years now.
Although, Gaza happened about 18 months ago, the attack there, pretty horrific stuff happened, and there was an international outcry after that. Investigations were, they said there would be investigations, the use of white phosphorus, the attack on civilians, and indiscriminate killings, and yet still nothing happened.
Well, one of the primary reasons for this flotilla in the first place is because after the world came together at Sharm el-Sheikh in March of 2009, they pledged over $4 billion of reconstruction aid for the people of Gaza. And to date, none of that material has gotten in. The world has issued in the past condemnations of the blockade. They've made promises and pledges, but they haven't followed it through with action. And we felt that as international citizens, as people of conscience, it was up to us to uphold international standards if our governments wouldn't. Hopefully the tide is turning now and the governments are beginning to get involved.
Ramzi, you're here in Washington, D.C., of course. You have to deal with what is largely a community, though very powerful as a country, that isn't that aware of what happens outside its borders to any real degree. When you talk to people here, do they get any sense of what's really happening in Gaza in terms of conditions?
No, I mean, I think Americans would be shocked if they understood exactly what was happening. Gaza is a tiny little place. It's 25 miles long, 4 to 7 miles wide. 1.5 million people, half of them children. It's one of the most densely populated places on the planet, and they just don't have the physical resources in order to be able to support their own population. The blockade has cut supplies coming into Gaza to less than 20% of what it was 4 years ago. And as a consequence, we've seen massive increases in childhood malnutrition, in poverty, and in hopelessness. And this cannot be sustained. Collective punishment is illegal under international law, and it's profoundly immoral.
Will the action that took place in terms of the strength of the attack on the flotilla discourage people from trying this again?
If that was Israel's calculation before they attacked our ships, then they made a severe mistake. Because rather than discourage or frighten people from coming along, we have been inundated with requests of people to join us on future missions, and there have been a number of groups that have not gotten involved in the past begin expressing interest in challenging this blockade themselves. There will be future missions to Gaza.
Interesting. I'm going to put an email to you that came in, if I can, from Atar Naqvi in Pakistan, who wrote into our Facebook page saying, since the attack involves non-Palestinians and peace activists, Israel will be held accountable for its actions by the international community. Did the makeup of those who traveled out to Gaza on the flotilla, is that going to have a significant bearing, you think?
Yeah, I think it will, unfortunately. I mean, we live in a world where, Palestinians are getting killed nearly every single day in the occupied territories in the West Bank and in Gaza, where Palestinians inside 48, in what is now Israel, are being oppressed, and the world doesn't pay much attention. If the only way to get to the attention of the larger powers of the international media is to put Western activists on board, then we will do that. And this racism also expressed itself in how Israel reacted to this flotilla in terms of differentiating between the Western and the Turkish activists, as if there was some sort of big difference just because we had people who were Muslim and people who were Western. And I think we need to challenge that racism.
I mean, looking at it from Israel's perspective, here you have a number of vessels, moving into an area that's been blockaded, and they've been, Israel is very strict with its sort of borders, and shows that it pretty much won't take any challenge to its authority. I mean, in the first instance, launching something like this, isn't it almost setting yourself up for this kind of situation?
We were delivering humanitarian aid. To make that a political issue is offensive, and it's Israel that's politicizing this entire thing. We traveled from our ports in the Eastern Mediterranean on international waters. We were taken on international waters. It was our intention to cross into Gaza, into Palestinian territorial waters, and deliver that aid. At no point did any of our ships have any intention whatsoever of sailing to Israel or violating Israeli waters. So to come and take us by force in the middle of the sea, far from Israel, and then say that we're violating their sovereignty, I mean, this is ridiculous.
Mitchell Barak, I'm going to try and get you back in here if I can, and ask you. I was started off by asking you. It's a tricky one for Israel to explain such a strong use of military force against an aid flotilla.
It is and it isn't. I mean, 5 of the boats stopped what they were doing. There was one boat that was looking for a fight and was looking to attack soldiers and threw soldiers overboard and used knives and marbles and clubs to beat the soldiers. The Israeli government made it clear early on, the Israeli army, both through the ambassador in Washington and through other diplomatic channels, that they would let all of the aid go through to Gaza, but not to try and come in with ships and to bring it in that way, and that the boats could dock in the Ashdod port and would then be transported to Gaza. I mean, Israel brings about 15,000 tons, or allows 15,000 tons a week of aid, humanitarian aid, to be passed through the Carney crossing point and through Israeli borders into Gaza. So it's not an issue that nothing is getting through, that there's a blockade and so forth. The issue is that oftentimes when there has been a relaxation of Israeli involvement in these things, so building materials like concrete are being brought in and being used to create bunkers, and missiles are being brought in and weapons are being brought in, which are going to be eventually used and are being used against Israel. And if we go back to 2005, when Israel left Gaza, withdrew from all settlements, the thought is that the Palestinians would take over and would start to take care of their own affairs, and Israel would live at peace with the Palestinians in Gaza. But what has happened since that time, 6,500 rockets have been fired into Israel.
Mitchell, on the issue,
the Israeli government has to defend its citizens.
On the issue of the flotilla, though, if this flotilla was in the wrong, and according to Israel, and of course Israel knows it's coming, it's not exactly a high-speed kind of entry towards Gaza. Why not get the international community involved? Why not get some kind of international intervention which puts Israel less at risk?
I think there was an interest to do that, and I think Israel reached out. Israel reached out to the Turkish government, and the Turkish government refused to be involved in it. There were contacts, high-level contacts between the Israeli ambassador in Washington and the Turkish ambassador in Washington, as well as through the foreign ministry and the defense ministry here in Israel with the Turkish government. There was an issue to try and resolve this. Even when we were talking about on the high seas, the Israeli Navy boats stressed over and over again, please stop. We will allow all humanitarian aid to go through our port in Ashdod. Please stop what you're doing. There were people who were looking for a provocation. They were looking for a fight. It serves the PR interests, and they got a fight. Okay. That's exactly what they got. It is unfortunate. The loss of lives is a terrible thing, but Israeli soldiers were attacked once they boarded those boats. And let me add that in the past, boats have come and tried to go to Gaza, and in every time, the Israeli Navy has boarded those boats without incident, just as 2 days ago when they boarded 5 of those 6 ships.
Okay,
so
listen,
there was no reason for them to think that there would be such a violent resistance.
Mitchell, because we're going to take a break, but before we do, let's hear from Henry in Florida and get his question. We can get the answer after the break. Henry, go ahead.
Yes, actually, I have one comment and one question.
Very quick then, please.
Yeah, and my comment is that Israel is always committing those atrocities and crimes against the people of Palestine, but the international community, they are always let Israel get away with it. I just want to find out why.
Okay.
The second question is that what is the actual difference between what the Israel are doing toward the Palestinians, and what is actually the difference between piracy of the Somalians?
Okay. Henry, thanks for your question. We're going to get a short break here. When we return, we'll get an answer to Henry's question, and we'll look at how the attack on the 8th flotilla is playing on the inside of Israel as well. Don't go away.